Hello there guys, what is going on? Son of Chelsea back here again for another video and another great Chelsea guest on the channel. I've been wanting to get this guy on for many months. It feels like maybe even over a year. I'm sure you guys, if you're subscribers to Nini FC, will know who this guy is. Joe Tweedie. Joe is a great guy to bring on the channel, I think, in terms of Chelsea, in terms of speaking about Chelsea. He has a weekly Chelsea newsletter, does a lot of work with the London is Blue pod guys, so definitely go and check out his work. All the link to Joe's work will be in the description box below, but we have a really interesting chat in terms of the current Chelsea team, how lockdown and sort of Chelsea's lockdown year will be remembered, how this interesting and weird period in football history will be remembered by Chelsea fans. We go on to discuss midfield, attack, Thomas Tuchel, the future, the rest of this season. I loved having this discussion, and it was a big discussion, but I think Joe's such a brilliant guest, such a great mind regarding Chelsea. So I hope you guys enjoyed this discussion. If you do, give the video a like, subscribe, hit that notification bell so you don't miss any of the uploads on the channel. But let's get to the discussion with Joe right now. So Joe, thank you so much for joining me. I've wanted to have you on the channel for months, and I know you're a very busy guy, but it's amazing to have you on now. How are you doing over in Switzerland? How are things? International break as we record, so there's been a little bit of a gap between the intensity of Chelsea, but how's life, man, at the moment?
Yeah, really, really good, mate. Thank you. Yeah, enjoying the move so far, as much as you can when you've moved countries in a pandemic, obviously. But yeah, it's a really nice location. Things are going well over here. It's like weather is just about turning, which is great. I know a lot of people are solar powered, and obviously with the pandemic, it's nice to get a little bit of vitamin D and a little bit of sunshine and fresh air. So yeah, enjoying things, and yeah, I think I'm with you on that. It was a good time for a break, I think, from Chelsea. I've been watching a little bit of the under-21s, a little bit of the internationals. Doesn't quite have that same level of intensity that we've had maybe for the past couple of weeks, but yeah, it's been a welcome break.
How have you found out, though, as like as a football lover, the idea that basically this season there's been many weeks when it's literally just been football. Almost every night of the week you could watch football. And I guess maybe a year ago, pre-COVID, that would have been like a dream scenario. But I don't know, I found it at times quite exhausting, I think is the best word for it. Have you found that sort of same sensation where it's like, it's a bit, I'm footballed out at this point, I can't watch anymore?
Yeah, football fatigue is definitely something I've experienced this year. Yeah, I think you're right. I think probably during the sort of the post-lockdown period, and back end of last season when we did that Project Restart thing, that was really cool because it was like every single day there was Premier League football. But now, and again, as somebody who watches a lot of European football as well, I kind of feel a little bit like I have to sort of pick and choose the matches that I want to watch. And yeah, I think that the level of investment that I think I've got in the general Premier League this season is actually quite low. Like, I'm obviously super invested in Chelsea. But I think someone asked me the other day, I think I've probably watched less than maybe 5 full games that haven't involved Chelsea this season in the Premier League, just because of obviously trying to keep up with Chelsea. And yourself as a content creator, the kind of the gap that you have to process stuff and try and get video ideas or try and get any kind of podcast ideas or something like that, it sort of stops because you're already onto the next game and you're already looking at the next moment. So I think from a Chelsea perspective, it's been interesting, trying to sort of keep engaged and keep up with things. But in terms of like the wider Premier League football, like I'm so far out of touch with kind of what's happening a little bit. And I think partly that is due to the fact that, as you say, it's not like, you've got your little Super Sunday with 1 or 2 or 3 games. It's Super Sunday. You've had a game on Thursday. There's probably one Friday night. Someone's playing on a Wednesday. Obviously, the Champions League is going thick and fast. It's really difficult to try and keep up with stuff. So yeah, I've definitely felt the kind of the football fatigue definitely kind of come in this season. I'm hoping obviously things sort of start to even themselves out, and then we look into next year and beyond, getting to a little bit more of a regular pattern, I think would make me appreciate what's happening a bit more. Because at the moment, sometimes you barely have a second to catch your breath before the next game is starting.
Yeah, it's tough to sort of, as you say, like, for you writing newsletters, trying to sometimes write them, weekly, and so much can happen in a week with Chelsea. If you play like 2 or 3 games and you get multiple results, and the sort of the mood around performances can change, and it's difficult to process things this year. Like, I remember the Tottenham win in particular, the Liverpool win. These are big wins that you want to savor for about a week, and you get like 3 days maybe at most. And then, especially as someone like me, making a preview for the next game, you literally you get like 1 day maybe where you get to maybe savor a little bit, watch the highlights back and sort of savor in a big win, but then literally it's on to the next thing. And in some ways that's good because if you get a bad result or bad performance, you don't feel too down about it, and maybe there's that chance to rectify it very quickly. But it has sort of felt like games for me, especially non-Chelsea games, have sort of merged together. Like they've, it feels like I'm watching sort of one, just a series of games in the same stadium with plastic sheets, and that's sort of wanted to get into in terms of, like, I wrote a piece for the Chelsea Social asking the question, sort of going into how will Chelsea's lockdown year be remembered. So of course we had the start of it last year, post that Everton game, the last time Stamford Bridge was full, basically, to now. Funny enough, we played Everton on the exact same day this year as well. So that's very weird, very strange, but there is a nice or bad parallel, if you want to say it there. How have you found it, and how do you think this year will be remembered? Because a ton of stuff has happened, and a ton of stuff could still happen for Chelsea historically that I'm sure we could remember very fondly. But I don't know, I'm sort of feeling that it won't have the same level of sort of feeling to it. There won't be like emotional stories people will have of going to games, of of being somewhere, of feeling the game. Do you feel that sort of same vibe after this year is over?
I think so, yeah. I mean, the way that I've kind of sort of positioned this, certainly this kind of question, I think there are possibly maybe three ways of looking at this. I think strictly from a kind of a club perspective, I think they'll be very kind of happy with how things are going. And I think as much as kind of benchmarking yourself against others during a pandemic might feel a little grubby in terms of how the club are doing financially, I think Chelsea's kind of resilience and the fact that we've kind of pretty much in business as usual, I think the club will take that as a very positive sign about the brand and all sort of the words that we absolutely love as Chelsea fans. But I think they'll take that in a very, very positive light. Obviously able to add a ton of really kind of highly sought after talent. Obviously, again, in terms of maybe utilising our strength during a pandemic as well to our advantage. But I think from the club side of things, they'll be pretty happy kind of where they are. And obviously the recent form, I would say, under Thomas Tuchel, to them probably kind of gives them some sort of indication that for at least 18 months, or say, the sort of the 18-month cut-off period that Chelsea managers have. But at least for 18 months, he'll be, I think they'll be quite happy with what Tuchel's doing. And then I think probably the kind of the final two are the sort of the fan perspectives. And then you'll have kind of the sort of division between, I think probably something we're going to touch on a little bit later. But I'll borrow some of Marcelo Bielsa's terminology here, the fans versus spectators. I think for fans of the club, regardless of what happens, the fact that Frank Lampard has been sacked, etc., that will sting. And I think it will sting for a long period of time. I think that doesn't imply that these people don't want Thomas Tuchel to succeed or are not enjoying the current period of the club. Frank Lampard holds, for me, and I think for many other Chelsea fans, a very, very special place in our hearts, and certainly in like the pantheon of greats of Chelsea. He is unquestionably a top three player, top three individual in terms of contributing to the success. So regardless of, I'm not going to get into whether he should have been sacked or kept on and all that sort of stuff, like it will sting because of the nature of who he is. I think probably from my perspective, that is the camp that I sit in, that, it's Frank Lampard, it will sting for a particular period of time. And then, the sort of the second half of that is the people who are quite glad that he's gone and we've got Thomas Tuchel and things are now pushing in the right direction. And that's an absolutely fine perspective to have. I just think certainly, the sort of closing point of your question there, when it comes to the possibility of, let's dream a little bit big here. Let's say we get to a European Cup final. Will that have the same resonance as, people who went home and away every single game in 2012? I know people that have, went to Benfica, went to Napoli, went to Barcelona. The scenes in the Nou Camp were part of that. Scenes of the, in Munich, even experiencing that as fans, having the atmosphere in the stadium. I couldn't imagine. Imagine scoring a last-minute winner against whoever in the final in Istanbul, and it's to the sound of muted applause, sort of, and a little bit of cheering on the sidelines. It doesn't quite have the same depth of emotion that I personally look for when it comes to sort of big moments. Obviously, it will be insane. Obviously, it will be absolutely incredible to win another European Cup. But I think we can perhaps look at Liverpool fans, and it's probably maybe the only time I've ever really felt sorry for them. First Premier League title, first title for them in absolutely ages. And, it was celebrated to the sounds of a really crappy fireworks display with nobody in the ground. They've not been able to have any kind of party or celebration. And you look back at it now and you see where they are this season. That one moment in time, I mean, it may not happen again for a very long period of time. And, the way that they have had to deal with that, I think, does not necessarily inspire me with a ton of confidence if Chelsea were to get to finals and if we were to have a really fantastic and obscenely good end to the season. Winning a European Cup, I would still be absolutely incredibly overwhelmed with joy that we've won it. But the prospect of not being there or not being, around my family and friends and all that sort of stuff and having that big kind of moment, I think it does lessen probably the impact for me. And again, it may sound silly to people because winning trophies are winning trophies, but I think for guys like myself and you and others who are used to having that camaraderie, going to games, who feel kind of the temperature and the pulse of the club quite deeply, not having that intense kind of emotional connection to a victory by being there or being present with family, I think that would probably dampen it a little bit for me.
Yeah, I mean, I wasn't at the Munich final. Of course, I know there's members of my family who did go to Munich, didn't even have a ticket for the game, but were out in Munich and have incredible stories. And, I think we all know people from Munich, friends, family, people we've interacted with online, how special that was. I mean, my dad did say to me the other day, nothing will ever top Munich anyway, because it's the first European Cup. You could never, the circumstances surrounding that, the way we won that trophy as well, it's just, it's fantasy. It really is. So I think it's always going to be difficult to topple Munich 2012. But I think I'm more interested actually in the FA Cup, because there's a potential of some fans being at Wembley and there could be something there. But I think about the FA Cup final days. I've been to the 2007 final, the 2009 final.
Super special.
And I both had special sort of meaning for me. I think I was at the Millennium Stadium for the League Cup final against the Liverpool one, and that was the first time I saw Chelsea win a trophy, and that was a very special day. But in particular, I think the best goal I've seen live, the best victory I've seen live personally, is beating Man United, that Man United side with the Drogba goal. And just, there are so many nuances I think that have been lost, even things that I and probably many others have forgotten about going to a game, that I just think it's those things that, to me, like a 4-4 against Ajax, will that have the same, does that hold the same level of emotion to me or meaning to say beating Man City recently? I'm not quite sure, and logically I know that doesn't make sense, but do you know what I mean? It's like emotionally, it's that thing of, and this is not me trying to discriminate against people who obviously can't get to the games, but it's that reality that unfortunately of the last year, there has been that hollow sense behind the best achievements. Every big win Chelsea have had, as recently as Atletico Madrid, I dreamed of having fans inside that ground, even if I wasn't there personally. It's taken away from that sort of mystique and fantasy and love of the game, really, that has been quite hard to sort of understand.
Yeah, I completely agree on that, and I don't think I could have said that better myself, actually. The Atletico game in particular is one that stands out, because I think I've sort of been on record saying that I think probably, if we're looking at kind of signature wins in Europe, that is maybe one of the best performances we've had in, I don't know, since 2013. On probably when we beat PSG, so also 2014. So you could say 7 years. 7 years is a very, very long period of time, particularly in football. And the performance that we had, the way that we dominated the game, the way that we won the game, the way that we played, the elements of Zuma and Rudiger kind of really standing up for the club and sort of that kind of moment. I would have loved to have just had some kind of reaction from the crowd there. Particularly, as you say, some of the nuances, the Zuma Rudiger stuff I thought was fantastic. But to see the crowd react to that, particularly Zuma running up from the back, like, I'm not having this nonsense that's going on here. Stuff like that, I think, would have been a little bit more appreciated. And even the winner, the win at Anfield, I know that Liverpool weren't in particularly great form. It's still Liverpool. It's still Anfield. It's still a place that holds a certain kind of reverence in English football. And again, the fact that it's Mason Mount, academy player, the fact that it's such a good performance, we've gone there and really, really kind of put down a marker. And the only real kind of, again, applause that you've got is a couple of Chelsea subs on the sideline, and Thomas Tuchel obviously very happy with how things have gone. But it does detract a little bit, I think, from the kind of the mystique, the emotional connection, the kind of the soul, the fabric of the club, really, that sort of underlying kind of oomph that you get from having that attachment. Yeah, of course, it's great. It's great to see the lads win on television and everyone's in kind of the same boat. But I think your point about, as you say, there being fans there and just giving it that little kind of extra 5% is kind of what's been missing. And again, I think a lot of the big moments we've had, they're often attached to kind of emotions and sort of, feelings that we felt experiencing that at the time. I don't know in 2, 3, 4 years' time if there's going to be the same kind of level of connection to that Atletico win, that Liverpool win, for example, because fans weren't there and maybe that connection isn't as strong. So, but it will be interesting to see, I think, in the future how people kind of react and reflect on this period, because I think, as you say, that emotional connection physically being there for a lot of people is what makes football so special. And maybe this season, if we go and win trophies, FA Cup, etc., how fondly that will be looked back on. I think Chelsea fans will still massively enjoy it, but there is that little, as you say, that little kind of extra bit of detail that I think some of us appreciate that will probably be lacking a little bit.
I think as well, when getting onto online discourse, versus the discourse or the support inside the ground, I think that it's just because there's been no fans inside there, for the exception of in the UK or England for a couple of weekends in, say, early mid-December. Chelsea had 2 games, Leeds and Krasnodar, where we had 2,000 fans in each game. Everything's been shifted online. Everything's basically Twitter, I think, is the easiest one to bring up here in terms of fan discourse, the Chelsea commentary, where fans will discuss what's going on with the club. And I know the club, and I know most big clubs now, it's a global game. There are many international fans who love and care about the club, who I interact with. And this is not me trying to start some sort of civil war, because we've had so many of them in recent years, and that's not what I'm trying to open up here. But the pulse of a club is their support inside the ground, isn't it? It's the home and away support, the vocal away support. And having none of that, I think, it shifted stuff onto online. And I can't describe, it is an absolute cluster fruitcake online, isn't it? In terms of the emotions and trying to gauge what's going on. How have you found that? Because to me, I just think it's been so hard, in particular that period just before Lampard got sacked, to gauge what fans are actually thinking, what this reaction would actually be inside the ground. That was always my sort of feeling. Well, because it's very easy. Online, unfortunately, is always going to be the way it is. And unfortunately, this season, it seems to get worse. And it just gets worse and worse each year, personally, in my opinion, for all fans. And that's, I think, made things a little bit harder, personally, for me in in the last 12 months, basically, to not feel a sense of cynicism about things. And I don't know if that's been something that has troubled you.
Yeah, I think this is a really interesting conversation point, and I touched on it a little bit earlier, but I kind of find that kind of Bielsa distinction between fans and spectators, I think I've found that really helpful to help me kind of rationalize how I think about this. And the reason why I like it, and I think I find it useful, is because it's not necessarily geographic. It's not about finances, about being able to go to games, etc. It's about a mentality of supporting the club. And I think you alluded to it correctly there. Certainly when you're sort of doing content creation, YouTube, podcasts, etc., you get to interact with incredibly passionate fans from all over the globe. And I think certainly those people that I think of in terms of this kind of Bielsa classification, they are absolutely 100% fans of the club. They get the connection. They have an emotional attachment to the club, and it kind of reflects the kind of mentality with which you support the club. I think he's right when he says the only irreplaceable thing in football are fans, spectators, coaches, managers, players, etc. They all eventually move on and they go on and do different things. The only thing really that is constant is the kind of the core fans of the group. And his distinction with spectators is that their kind of enjoyment of football largely depends on I think he uses the phrase, the beauty that it is offered. So like the product that they are watching, how successful the wins, the stats and all that sort of stuff that these sorts of fans tend to, or spectators as he calls them, these spectators tend to enjoy more. And I often find, certainly when I read, I don't tend to wade into these debates because I just don't have the time for them. But when I kind of maybe dip in and read some of the takes, I think the lack of understanding of the emotional connection that fans have to a club, and trying to belittle that and trying to make that seem like it's some sort of irrational nonsense, kind of to me, that's where this online discourse stuff, I think, really begins and ends with me. I find personally that I want to discuss football. I want to have conversations with football. People can think different things about players and different things about whatever, but your core connection to the club should be something that is similar to mine if we are to have a fruitful conversation. Chelsea, to me, goes way beyond the fact that we've won trophies. It goes way beyond results. It goes way beyond, the style of play or the aesthetic beauty of the team. I will support Chelsea if we have some massive scandal and are relegated to the whatever, the Isthmian Brimian League, whatever it's going to be, playing SE Dons on a Sunday. And I think a lot of people would probably reflect that as well. I think this is kind of, where this sort of, this is where the kind of the turn has really kind of settled in for me is, I've heard a lot of idiotic stuff said within Stamford Bridge. I'm not suggesting by any stretch of imagination that everyone who goes to football matches is this massive intellectual, kind of beast, and they're eloquently, they can eloquently speak about the game. But I know people that go to games, or even people that Bielsa would call as fans. Their main focus is Chelsea Football Club, the betterment of Chelsea Football Club. They have an emotional attachment to the club that goes beyond wins and losses. They have, an understanding of the, the players that have made us, kind of where we are. They get the attachment to Frank Lampard. All this, you need to separate Lampard from the manager and the player. I mean, you can't. It's Frank Lampard. And if you don't understand that it's Frank Lampard as a sentence and as a point, then you and I speak different kind of football languages. And I think that's kind of where we're sort of heading now. Is you have this kind of divide between, and it seems to me, kind of newer fans who have this sort of mentality where and it's almost a little bit like American sports, where a lot of people follow players as opposed to follow. You have LeBron James fans, you have Steph Curry fans. If Steph Curry goes and plays for the Chicago Bulls, they're going to follow him to the, they're not going to be Golden State fans, for example. And I think that sort of the rise of that way of viewing football, certainly when it comes to football players, for people that are maybe a little bit old school, who, I support Chelsea, not particular players. I may be now a sort of dinosaur in terms of how I support stuff, but the juxtaposition between this sort of newer trend of supporting players and supporting the club, that friction that exists, I don't think that's going to go anywhere. The more kind of, as you say, that the further that this sort of goes along, and the more people join the quote unquote football Twitter side of things, where you rep players and it's about having edgy opinions and you have to be, sort of chasing clout and saying some quite obscene and outlandish things at times to sort of get attention and to sort of, notoriety. I just think that there's a lot of people, you, me, loads of people included, that just find that quite tiresome. And I think that side of social media is where a lot of us try to sort of stay away from. I think that's kind of where this online discourse stuff for me will stop, is that I've kind of consciously decided just to not engage with it. And that means, maybe that eventually I miss out on somebody who's really talented and having a really thoughtful conversation with somebody. But, in terms of me enjoying being on social media, talking to guys like you and other people and getting to know people in that respect, you have to put up some sort of barrier to sort of a barrier to entry, you could say, in terms of having conversations. So, yeah, I mean, it's a bit of a sort of a rambly kind of all about way of saying things, but I just think that this kind of, dichotomy between, I don't even want to call them old school fans. I just think you have like traditional football fans and, maybe we'll just use the Bielsa stuff, traditional football fans and spectators. That separation, that kind of distinction between the two, and I don't think that either group is going to understand the other, because I think that they're so distinctly different, that you're just going to be at a point where you continue to have these ridiculous debates about, is Frank Lampard a Chelsea legend? And you're just like, I mean, like, come on, guys, or looking at, the Didier Drogba one is another one that comes up all the time. Was Didier Drogba that good as a player? It's like, okay, we're talking about arguably one of the best big game players in the history of football across any team, anywhere. But because he didn't have a 0.2345 ratio in the X divided by Y mean metric or whatever, he's not particularly good. So, yeah, all in all, I think it's just one of those things that will persist. I try to gravitate towards people that have that connection, that deeper connection to the club, who understand basic stuff, basic stuff about what I consider to be sort of football. As you say, it's Frank Lampard should be all I need to say in some context in terms of having a debate with someone. And that's kind of where I'm leaving it. So, yeah, I mean, the online discourse, inside the ground stuff, it is kind of what it is at this point in time. I think if you choose to engage with it, then that's more power to you. But I found certainly recently that actively disengaging from certain parts of Twitter that I just really did not enjoy being kind of gravitating towards, or having conversations with people that dwell there, has made the experience a lot more pleasurable for me. But
yeah, I think you sort of touch on many of the important aspects, and it's unfortunately Twitter is a mess, and it does make you, and unfortunately, as we've had a lot of time to think over the last year with the way the world is, and you do feel quite cynical about it, and you feel, is this almost defeatist in a sense, and that's not what I want to be with my club. That's not what I want to be in life. That's not the way I want to think about things. But unfortunately, Twitter does make you feel like I've gotten into just using TweetDeck, which unfortunately really does like nail down or like whittle down who I'm actually going to listen to and interact with. But that's the only way I get a decent sort of stream of opinions, something that I actually want to see. And unfortunately, like, it's not me forcing myself into an echo chamber and trying to think that I just only want to hear what I agree with. That's not the case at all. But there's a limit to me. There is a clear line of distinction that I think you've touched on there in relation to certain figures who mean a lot to Chelsea's history. And I just think it makes things a lot easier. I think that it's, for me, in recent months, as we went, before Lampard got sacked, I think it became quite clear to me certain individuals and certain ways of thinking, and it just revealed to me, there are those, as you explained, who I think would, who love this club, who it's embedded in who they are, sort of a big part of their identity, and don't care where we are. They're not, I didn't start supporting Chelsea. The reason I fell in love with this club wasn't because we signed someone for £90 million. It wasn't because of a goal compilation on YouTube. It wasn't even because of one moment. There are reasons why I think all of us fell in love with this club, and I just at times it does feel like people view football clubs now as like a disposable Netflix series. Something that they'll watch. Very and I'm massively into film, and a lot of the fandom stuff that happens for, say, something like Star Wars recently in recent years feels very similar to what's happened in football. I listen to the way people, the toxic side of that sort of aspect of things, and I think you can sort of plant it, move it over here.